a new procedural victory for DOJ prosecutor Jack Smith, and thus a legal loss for defendant Donald Trump, who got in trouble for his recent attacks on his own former aide turned key DOJ witness, Mark Meadows. Jack Smith just won his bid to invoke those attacks to re-gag Trump, and that is the kind of technical legal way to put it. You may have heard about this. I'm going to walk through it with you right now. Basically, late Sunday, the federal judge overseeing that open coup case reinstated a partial gag order that bars defendant Trump from attacking witnesses and others. And that order had been on hold, basically in deference to the appeals process. But Trump blew that by attacking Meadows after ABC reported that he was cooperating with Jack Smith against Trump in this coup case. Now, this judge found that Trump's attack almost certainly violated what would have been that initial gag order. Trump had singled out a foreseeable witness in a, quote, attempt to influence him in a way that would be, of course, preventing the witness's participation in this case, end quote. Now, those words I just said, that is how a judge carefully explains witness tampering. In plain English, though, I got to tell you to start the night, another reaction here would just be, duh. Because it doesn't take that much analysis when Donald Trump is literally, publicly attacking this key witness, Mark Meadows, to try to shape his testimony. And underneath that, there is a guilty mindset because apparently the defendant here, Donald Trump, worries that just truthful testimony would be bad for him, would hurt him in court. This is the same tactic, of course, that Donald Trump has used in other settings, including times when there wasn't a case pending. He used it against his own vice president, Mike Pence, which led up to the insurrection, as Trump fans literally responded by putting up a gallows in front of our Congress. Efforts that the Secret Service took seriously, that they viewed as plots to murder and assassinate Mike Pence, who is back in the news, by the way, because he just quit his Republican presidential campaign over the weekend. Now, this is also just like how Trump attacked another former aide turned witness, Michael Cohen, when he called him a rat and used mob language to try to intimidate him. Now, for years, Trump has used this kind of mob talk and action to try to corrupt the cases against him, to try to duck accountability. It's a knowing nod to basically everything from mafia movies to real-life New York mobsters that Trump has talked about before. Take John Gotti, who, remember, beat 3 different cases amidst allegations of tampering and worse before finally getting convicted. Now, that's a comparison that actually goes just beyond their rhetoric or even their mugshots, which we put up here to remind you that they've both faced their legal proceedings. It reminds everyone, including some of the prosecutors facing off against Trump, that people who are habitually accused of criminal conduct and who habitually intimidate or attack witnesses can sometimes get out of things. And prosecutors and judges have to adjust for that and then figure out how to maintain an independent and fair court that is not abused or corrupted by those sometimes effective tactics, including against witnesses. So while some of this is old and familiar, when I tell you tonight that the news is this judge, who was so fair that she paused the gag order, is reinstating it, it is to prevent Donald Trump from trying to go Gotti again. Now, the problem here remains that Meadows does not seem to be backing off from what we know. And we don't know everything. We've cautioned people that a lot of these proceedings are private until they go to trial. But the reporting and the implications are that Mark Meadows is cooperating with Jack Smith. And that may mean that he is more scared of the prosecutors than his old boss, Donald Trump, right now. And before I get to our great guests that we've assembled tonight, I'm going to give you the breakdown to show why. Meadows is also a co-defendant in Georgia, where now 3 of his former co-workers have confessed. Those are the red convicted stamps you see on the top row. They've pled guilty. And those convicted people are now vowing to testify against Meadows, who you see indicted in the bottom row, and the others who are holding out, and of course Donald Trump, the key defendant in that RICO case. But remember, 2 of those Georgia convicts and 3 of those defendants overall are also on the hook in this separate but related Jack Smith DOJ case. They are the unindicted co-conspirators: Powell, Chesbrough, Giuliani, Eastman, and Clark. So this is where Meadows has reportedly struck a deal. Remember, we don't know what he's doing in Georgia. We know the heat is rising, but in the DOJ front, we have him as a witness seeking some sort of immunity to testify. And that could hurt the indicted Trump. It could hurt the other co-conspirators. So those are the two separate cases. Now, in our breakdown for you, I want to show you the combined pressure with these recent developments over just the past 2 weeks or so, because when you take both cases together, you see why Trump is now in a worse spot. Meadows, now a star witness for the DOJ as he eyes his fate in Georgia as well. The other Georgia convicts are now under pressure to match whatever they swear under oath in Georgia with what they may ultimately say about Trump and the coup plots in the DOJ federal case. They could also, like Meadows, try to get some sort of witness immunity deal themselves. And some of them, as you see on the bottom of the screen, aren't cooperating yet in either place. So Giuliani, Eastman, and Clark, they're kind of standing by while other people take deals. Now, anyone who hasn't taken a deal and been convicted is legally presumed innocent. They may ultimately win. They could win in Georgia. They could not ultimately be turned from an unindicted to an indicted co-conspirator. We are just going to track the evidence on that. But the sum total of the two cases you see on your screen with Donald Trump in the upper left, indicted in both places, is that there are more people convicted, more people confessing, and more people providing testimony who didn't even confess, like Meadows, than there were a few weeks ago. That's the legal context for Donald Trump lashing out at Meadows in D.C., even though he jeopardized his own gag order. That's the context because Trump knows that's where his first case is coming. It's also why he is re-gagged by this judge as of, well, late last night. Now, it has become somewhat common to treat Trump's cases as all kind of a blur. And there's been a conventional wisdom that's formed over the past few years. You may have heard that, the top Trump people, well, they don't really seem to get in trouble. Well, seeing reality, though, requires seeing when things change, even if it breaks a pattern, or as they like to say in D.C., a narrative. So what's changing is now 3 Trump aides are in trouble confessing, 1 cooperating as well with Meadows, and no one has faced a coup trial yet. The 3 who pled guilty did so to avoid having to face the evidence and the witnesses in court, as well as the stiffer jail sentences that come with trying to fight all the way to the end. That's why Jenna Ellis cut that deal. Now, when I mentioned the conventional wisdom and the narrative, not everyone is tracking this every day. People are busy with their own lives, with other problems. There's other news stories. There's everything going on in the world. And so it is understandable that it's almost become a kind of a punchline that Donald Trump is facing so many different cases. Even people who kind of keep an eye on it have trouble keeping track. Indeed, I want to share with you what Saturday Night Live said about this in a joke just over the weekend.
Former president and current courtroom sketch model Donald Trump testified on the stand for the first time in over 10 years. And it's fun that nobody is 100% sure which trial this sketch is from.
Which trial is it? Now, to some degree, that is a mood that the Trump folks think can help them in the short run, at least politically. The idea that it all sort of becomes a blur, and what was once this bad sign, unprecedented thing of a former president being indicted has become a kind of a cacophony of cases and dues and dribbling updates out of those cases. But that is PR. That is optics. Over here are courtrooms. And again, defendant Trump is presumed innocent. Mark Meadows, who hasn't decided what he's going to do in Georgia, presumed innocent there. They are all legally presumed innocent, and if they beat the case, we'll report on that and life will go on. But the difference in the courtroom that you can't just joke away or blur away or use PR tactics to minimize is that Donald Trump is going on trial in March in this federal case where he is now partially gagged, facing reportedly Mark Meadows, and facing the prospect of other unindicted co-conspirators who are now convicts in state court, who have now confessed. And that pressure is building in a way that he understands, which is why he, the man with so many court cases and so much court experience, people can literally joke about it, why he took a knowing risk going after Meadows in public, because apparently he is very scared that if his former chief of staff, who was more involved than any other living person in the day-to-day lead up to the insurrection, if that guy comes in and tells the truth, well, it could get Donald Trump convicted in federal court, or he could end up in federal prison.